Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, radiyallahu anhu. He says that the station of goodness in the dunya as well as in the akhirah, how we get there is bi amanatin nufusikum. Firstly, dying from our egos, then dying from our caprice, dying from our vain desires. And the Sheikh says in regards to this, alaykum bil mautul khas, qabla mautul am. It is obligatory upon you, he was telling his students in Baghdad. It is obligatory for you to die the specific death before dying the general death. The general death is, al-mautu am, is when our arwah, our spirits, leave our bodies and our physical heart stops beating. And this is when we are declared to be literally dead. Dead does not mean non-existence to us as Muslims. Those people who are not Muslims, especially al-muhiddin, the atheists, believe that life ends when the physical heart stops beating. We say that death is nothing but the separation of the ruh from the jasad, from the spiritual entity, the spirit from the physical body. So the Sheikh is saying that al-mautul khas is dying a specific death that we seek to annihilate and we seek to put to death. Number one, acting off of our egos, in which egoism is one of the biggest false gods that people submit to. It's the ego. It's the worship of self. And we have to be very careful of this, my brothers and sisters in Islam. And the Sheikh continues with this discourse mentioning this. Zahiruka muwahid wa batinuka mushrik. He says, outwardly you look like a monotheist, but inwardly you're a polytheist. Why? Because the outward form looks like worship. The outward libas looks Muslim. We have nice Yemeni shawls, kufis, turbans, qamis, thobe, names like Abu Bakr, names like Omar, names like Zainab. All of these things, libas al-Islam. Outward ritual worship. But in fact, in many cases, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not the ma'bud, the object of worship. It is the nafs, in which we do things to satisfy the nafs. The craving is to make the self feel good. Like that old Sprite commercial, obey your thirst, drink Sprite. Obey your ego, obey your hawa, what your caprice, what your appetites call you towards. Even sometimes being done in the name of Islam. One of the sayyids in the Arabic language, a salty, is that when we have, let's say, a word from a trilateral root, and you have the harf that's in the middle, you can have a difference of the harf in the middle, but there is still a type of etymological or linguistic relationship between words, even when they have a different harf in the middle. Example, wathan in Arabic means an idol. El-wathaniya means idolatry. Watan in Arabic means a land or a country. El-wataniya means patriotism or nationalism. So there is a slight subtle distinction between nationalism and idolatry. when people can literally begin to take their nationality or take a homeland and take it as a source of worship, even if it becomes a secular identity. Relating this issue of Philistine, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help our brothers and sisters in Philistine. Even in regards to our prayers for help and for justice, that struggle should be done seeking the wajh, the countenance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If it's done for other than that, it can be a subtle form of polytheism. Well, some people who outwardly look Muslim are looking to establish something and want something there other than something under the banner or flag of Islam. Maybe they want a neo-Marxist type of secular state. We want our brothers and sisters not to be killed, not to be massacred. But it should not be our objective to establish a woke or neoliberal secular state. That shouldn't be our number one goal. That shouldn't be our goal. So there's a fine line between wathaniya and wataniya in regards to the inward self and seeking to kill or annihilate, acting off of our egos first, doing things due to egoism. Al-Khalifatul Rashid, Ali ibn Abi Talib, Karamallahu ta'ala wajahu radiallahu an, he said, Akhraju min ad-dunya qulubakum min qabli an takhruja minha abadanakum. It is have your hearts leave from the dunya. Akhrajakum min ad-dunya qulubukum min qabli an takhruja minha abadanakum. Have your hearts leave from the dunya before your bodies leave from the dunya. Meaning that in our spiritual sciences and what we're taught by our spiritual doctors, our aim should be to have inward directedness and our hearts connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if we are connecting first our hearts to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this means disconnecting our hearts for the love of the dunya. As it has been taught by our teachers, we take the dunya out of our hearts and we have it in our hands. We control the dunya instead of having the dunya control us. If we live for the dunya or for hubbut dunya, then we become abidut dunya or abidul mal. As Sayyidina Hussein ridwanullahi ta'ala wa salamuhu alayhi said at Karbala, there were, when he left Mecca to go to Iraq, there were 10,000 letters of people from Kufa who gave him allegiance, who gave him bay'ah. 10,000. They said they were going to protect him. Come here, come live with us, we will protect you. Then the people came from Bani Umayyah and came and gave them thamanan qalilan, gave them some money, the heads. And when he came and saw that his cousin was killed and fled to Karbala, which was not an offensive battle, even though some of the extremists of the rejectors will say it was offensive. Not an offensive struggle. When he got to that area, he saw the same people who pledged allegiance were on the other side of the battlefield with their swords drawn against him, the grandson of the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wasallam. And then he told them, starting off in his speech, and nas abidut dunya, meaning aktharun nas. Most of the people are just slaves to dunya, slave to money. They will sell their religion for a measly price, thamanan qalilan, as a language is used in the Quran. Our struggle, brothers and sisters in Islam, should always keep our intentions pure for the sake of Allah in everything that we do. Everything that we do in the broadest sense is a form of ibadah if it's done with three components. And this is from the meaning of the ayah, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I did not create jinn nor men except to worship me alone. And the three components are, for proper worship, al-ubudiyya, is number one, knowing Allah. Number two, learning what is pleasurable to Allah and what is displeasing to Allah. Number two. And number three, striving to implement for the sake of Allah those things that He commanded and staying away from the sake of Allah, fighting our egos, fighting our desires, staying away from those things that He prohibited. This is al-ubudiyya in the complete sense outside of just making salah or fasting. It's an entire life in regards to submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Mutu qabla an tamutu. Die before you die. In conclusion, there is an athar narrated by Al-Imam al-Kabir Ahmed al-Rifa'i radiyallahu anhu. It says that Sayyidina Ali came in Medina in an area and he saw only two people in this time worshiping. One was a Bedouin, but the first of those was Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu. And he heard Abu Bakr make a supplication, ibtihal, we can use this term. It's very short, yet sums up the matter that we should strive to have a heart state, even if we don't say it with our tongues, with everything we do. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was pleading to his Lord, and he said, Ilahi, inni uriduk. Ilahi, inni uriduk. Ilahi, inni uriduk. My God, surely I desire nothing but you. And Shah Naqshband has a similar dua who comes from the spiritual lineage of Abu Bakr Siddiq. Ilahi anta maqsudi wa ridaka matlubi. My God, you are my aim. And your felicity, your pleasure, that's all that I desire. This is the attitude. This is part of the spiritual purification. So when we have our nafs barking at us like dogs, our nufus, when they start barking at us like dogs, let us pause and renew our intentions. What we are doing is not for the lower self. It's not for the caprice. It's not for prestige with the people. It's not to be accepted by people. It's not, firstly, for some sort of political goal. The political goal is secondary. It's not the primary maqsad. The maqsood is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The goal is Allah. And if we do this, my brothers and sisters in Islam, if more of us commit ourselves to this understanding of traditional Islam, not wokeism, not the way of being nafsani, about me, my. It makes me feel good to be at the protest. Makes me feel good to click. It makes me feel good to do this or do that. If we can get out of that heart set to the heart set, which is following the way of the Prophet ﷺ, because our following him is not supposed to be outward, it's also an inward following. It's zahir wa batin, outward and inward. Then we will see some change in our community and our ummah. We will see real change. Change that's lasting. Just as the change that took place when during the first Crusades, Jerusalem was occupied for over 100 years, longer than these Zionists have occupied Palestine, to the extent that they put a cross at Masjid al-Aqsa. Muslims couldn't pray there at all. Muslims are praying 5 times a day at Masjid al-Aqsa. I saw the Fakir saw the Khutbah Jumu'ah today on YouTube from Masjid al-Aqsa. They're praying Taraweeh at Masjid al-Aqsa. Muslims cannot go and pray at all for several generations. But it was likes of the Tajdeed, the spiritual revival of the likes of Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani, and Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi, and Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, that within one generation of Muslims being reset and being refocused on purifying the self, of instilling that discipline, of the establishment of the Fatwa guilds. When Salahuddin al-Ayyubi went into Jerusalem, a generation later, after the establishment of these Fatwa guilds, he was carrying 2 things with him, it's reported: a mushaf of the Quran and a copy of Ihya Ulumuddin by Imam Ghazali. That's where the Hurriya, al-Hurriya lil-Falastin, comes that way. Doesn't come just from being nafsani. God speak truth to power. The first truth to power we speak is to our own individual nafs. After jihad, kalimatul haq and sultan jair min aqwal nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, meaning of zahir batin. He said the most virtuous jihad is speaking a word of truth and justice to a tyrant. The first tyrant isn't Netanyahu. The first tyrant isn't Biden. The first tyrant is my own nafs, your own nafs. That's the first tyrant. The secondary tyrant is Netanyahu and Biden and all these other shayateen min al-ins. So we have to deal with the both. We have to start with the inward and then deal with the outward. Not just focus all of our time on outward and don't do anything with the inward, or very little with the inward. This is backwards. This is the wrong methodology. This is not the methodology of the Sahaba and Tabi'een and the awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to purify us. We ask Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have a struggle to end and kill acting off of our egos and acting off of our caprice and our selfish desires. أقول قولي هذا استغفر الله لكم استغفروه فإنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا محمد المصطفى وعلى آله الأصفياء وأصحابه الأتقياء والتابعين لهم بخير وإحسان إلى يوم الجزاء. وأما بعد، يقول الله تبارك وتعالى في كتابه الكريم: إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت وباركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم اهدنا فيمن هديت وعافنا فيمن عافيت وتولنا فيمن تواليت وبارك لنا فيما أعطيت وقنا شر ما قضيت إنك تقضي ولا يقضى عليك إنه لا يذل من وليت ولا يعز من أديت تباركت ربنا وتعاليت ولك الحمد على ما قضيت. نستغفرك يا ربنا ونتوب إليك. نستغفرك يا ربنا ونتوب إليك. نستغفرك يا ربنا ونتوب إليك ونؤمن بك ونتوكل عليك. اللهم إنا نعوذ بك من الفقر إليك. اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم أصلح أمة محمد. اللهم أصلح أمة محمد. اللهم أصلح أمة محمد. اللهم فرج عن أمة محمد. اللهم فرج عن أمة محمد. اللهم فرج عن أمة محمد. اللهم ارحم أمة محمد. اللهم ارحم أمة محمد. اللهم ارحم أمة محمد صلى الله تعالى عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا دائما أبدا. اللهم انصر إخوانا في فلسطين. اللهم انصر إخوانا في فلسطين. اللهم انصر إخوانا من فلسطين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين. سبحان ربك بالعزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. أقيموا الصلاة.